Week 2 covers chapters 4, 5, and 6. Chapter 4 is cultural competence. Let's take a look. Our own cultural competence starts with our perception and attitudes that are influenced by our own culture. A really great journal topic to write about is your own culture. Understanding our own perceptions will be very important in working with others. When we work with others from cultures different from our own, it is our ethical responsibility to become acquainted and seek to understand them from our client's perspective. Here are some important definitions. Culture generally refers to an entire society where the citizens share a common understanding. The subculture, these are fractions of the overall culture that have their own beliefs and ideas. Race and ethnicity groups are biological factors that refer to a group of people who share a common cultural heritage. Our own cultural upbringing may cause us to be uncomfortable around those that are unfamiliar and who we don't know much about. Sometimes these feelings solidify into attitudes and judgments, the result of which is a we versus them attitude. This attitude leads to reluctance to explore other cultures. Please take this time as a developing professional to learn all that you can, especially about those populations that you may work with. The way to break any we versus them attitudes is to seek to find the exceptions. Look for differences than what we regularly believe. The exceptions indicate that there is more to learn, and in fact that all people of whichever culture are not the same. Then we can recognize that there is a lot that we don't know, and that we can be open to finding out more about that culture. The textbook talks about two dimensions of culture. Cultures are either individualistic or collectivistic. Individualistic cultures, such as in Western society, are focused on individuals and their families. Collectivistic cultures, such as those in Eastern societies, are focused on the group or on the benefit of the whole. When meeting a client for the first time who may be from a different culture that we are unfamiliar with, it may be helpful to do a first dimensional view as either individualistic or collectivistic. Of course, being aware that this is just a first dimensional view and the need to seek to understand all facets of culture will be important. Individualistic cultures are more focused on the family and self. There is a maximum emphasis on the individual outcomes, me and mine. Generally, these societies are more vertical and value freedom. Collectivistic cultures are all about the we and cooperation and group, emphasizing belonging. On the downside, the collectivistic cultures tend to de-emphasize personalization and promote conformity. This is the way we all do it. Some more definitions to understand, especially prior to taking the quiz for the week. As you develop into professionals, the assumption is that you will become more culturally competent. Culturally competent workers are adaptable, flexible, and have a commitment to give high quality service to every person who comes for assistance. Some of you students may have very broad and diverse cultural experiences. However, it is time to be aware that San Luis Obispo is not a very broadly diverse population. With approximately 77% of the population is Caucasian, and the only other threshold population is Hispanic. So working within San Luis Obispo County, however, there are many subpopulations that you may work with in your work here. For example, the youth culture is quite different than the older adult retiree population of the county. The geographics of our area is very different for North County than are different for South County beach styles and ideas. Regardless of culture, competent workers are respectful of all whom we work with, and we let others know they have been heard and their concerns are significant. Cultural and social status are macro levels of interventions, and as we learned in Chapter 3, our first priority is the micro level, showing respect to all to build those working relationships. The attitudes that we hold about other people are bound to be communicated to them one way or the other, if not overtly, then through our behavior, body language, tones, and thoughts. A positive, supportive, helpful, and respectful attitude is needed to build the rapport necessary to begin a helping relationship with all types of people. From humanistic psychology or person-centered theory, the father of person-centered therapy is Carl Rogers. He described 3 basic counseling attitudes needed for effective helping to happen: warmth, genuineness, and empathy. These are definitions that you must know and to be able to demonstrate in your video submissions. These are not just words to be memorized, but behaviors that I will be looking for. Warmth is a friendly, non-judgmental, receptive, and interested attitude that the helper portrays to the client. This attitude is conveyed through body language, such as leaning toward the client, nodding your head. Active listening and careful reflections are given to the client so that the client feels understood. Genuineness is an open, truthful, and authentic personality that comes across to the client. Being transparent and relatable is important to the client. Empathy is not the same thing as sympathy. Empathy is related to compassion, that you can understand what the client is saying, experiencing like feelings, and expressing words and content. This is demonstrated through reflective listening skills, which we will review in the next few chapters on communication. When the helper demonstrates an accurate understanding of what the client is saying, that is when the true connection happens. You do not need to have had the same exact experience as your client, but instead that you can understand those feelings and actions of their experience. Some beginning students say, "I can't help a drug addict because I've never been one." This is absolutely not true. You don't have to have experience with every situation a client brings to session. You have to have the empathy to understand what it is or was like for that client. That is empathy. Judgmentalness comes across in many different ways. This is a feeling that the client has about you. Listen to the client's feedback. Using our own standards to compare to the client is not helpful. Why are some clients uncooperative, ungrateful, or hostile when we are trying to help them? It is unrealistic that all of our clients will be happy to see us, to do whatever we say, and to think we are the greatest counselor ever. This doesn't happen. They may have transference issues that they are unaware of. They may be frustrated at the situation they find themselves in. And even though you're a good listener, they'll be frustrated. They may feel you are trying to help them too much. They can do it themselves. They may feel you are trying to control them with your help, like regarding medications. They're afraid of change. They're afraid to disappoint you. Remember that in our treatment and case management, we are talking about being strength-based. This means that we are building upon what the clients did that is right, strong, and movement towards recovery and wellness. It is important to focus on these strengths. Providing negative feedback or sanctions, punishment, is not a way to gain cooperation. If your client gets discouraged, they may just choose to not come back at all. It is up to you, as the counselor or the case manager, to provide strength and hope, but to also give realistic feedback and demonstrate to the client ways to improve. Boundary is that invisible line where you end and the client begins. We as the helper are responsible to never cross that boundary. The client may try to push the boundaries and may try to get more personal than professional, but this will fall onto the professional to prevent. If you feel uncomfortable in working with a particular client, you must bring this up to your supervisor as soon as possible. When boundaries become blurred or crossed, the client or case manager can be held liable. Making assumptions about your clients, either because they're exactly like me at that age or at that stage of recovery, or the opposite, because they are nothing like me. They are so different. Erecting too strong of a boundary may hinder your working relationship with the client. It is a fine balancing act between too much sharing and too much self-disclosure, yet on the opposite, of being too rigid and too professional so that your client cannot relate to you at all. Two dynamics in the counseling relationship that can lead to boundary crossing and cause ethical problems. Transference is when the client has feelings about the counselor or case manager. Transference is not necessarily good or all bad. There is positive transference when your client says to the counselor, "You look like my mother, and she was a loving person who took care of me." This, of course, is not true that you are the person's mother, and your role is not to take care of the client. There is a negative transfer. So, for example, when your client says to the counselor, "You look like my mother, and she was always so mean and abusive to me." This, of course, is also not true. You are not the person's mother, and you have never been abusive to anyone. In other words, accept transference for what it is, a memory. It has nothing to do with the here and now, and it has nothing to do with you personally. So, let's think of some examples. How might you handle the client's transference? In these situations, especially if you are tempted to be reactive in your response, it would be best to stay in your role and use all of your counseling skills at reflective listening. So that negative transference where you remind the client says, "You're so mean and abusive, you remind me of my mother." It would be inappropriate to say, "I'm not your mother. I've never abused anybody." That would be inappropriate. A more appropriate response would be, "So, I remind you of your mother. Tell me more about her, both the good and the bad." Again, use all of your counseling skills at reflective listening. Countertransference. It has been hard for me to remember which one is which between transference and countertransference. But I have discovered a little memory trick. Counter, meaning C-O-U-N, begins the word countertransference, and that belongs to the counselor that also begins with C-O-U-N. So countertransference are the feelings that the counselor has about the client because of a memory or someone from the counselor's past. Countertransference can also be positive or negative. It is important not to react to our own feelings when they surface. Again, recognizing that they are from the past, and it is a memory, not a situation from the current time, nor about this particular client. Countertransference may be a signal that the counselor may have some old issues to work through, or it may be a fleeting acknowledgement that is needed to be addressed with the treatment team or with your supervisor. Failing to address these feelings may lead us to give differential treatment to one client over another. Next, you should be doing the discussion forum week 2 on boundaries. This is worth 10 points. Then the quiz on week 2, which is also worth 10 points. Then it's time to hand in your resource directory assignment, which is due by Sunday at midnight. This is worth 25 points. Let's go on. Next week, reading chapters 7, 8, and 9, we'll begin our section on communication skills.